Welcome to the show, y'all. Welcome to the show. I am here. I am filled to the brim with news. I got news pouring out of my earlobes and dripping from my eyeballs. We're going to get to, I got an update on the Steven Crowder versus Ben Shapiro and Daily Wire thing. Steven Crowder went on Tim Pool's show, and he decided to drop a couple nukes while he was in there. So we're going to go through some of the specific claims that he made. And then later on in the show, I got terrifying AI advancements that should make you soil your britches, I believe they used to say back in the day. So get ready to soil your britches. And then also later on, I have Ghislaine Maxwell. By the way, I still don't even know how to pronounce her name. Like, I've heard Ghislaine, Ghislaine. I don't even think she knows how to pronounce her name. So she apparently made quite a splash with a huge admission about Jeffrey Epstein, so we'll get to that a little bit later. By the way, even saying the name Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell, I'm sure we're going to get hit with a demonetization spree. So if you like the show, you can support the show on Patreon. Link is in the video description box below. And of course, you know the new cursing policy is absolutely obliterating us. YouTube doesn't want people cursing anymore. They demonetize if you curse. They say within the first, X number of seconds of the video, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that it goes a lot further than that. And also, by the way, if you want to, you can always listen to the show now on Spotify. So if you want to listen to like the full show as a podcast version, instead of going video for video, you could go on over to Spotify and check the show out there. It's the Kyle Kulinski Show on Spotify. Anyway, all right. So without further ado, let's jump into it here. So Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro have been beefing. And perhaps beefing is an understatement. They're kind of ripping each other to shreds. Now, it's really Steven Crowder versus the Daily Wire, which is, Ben Shapiro's company. And just to give everybody, to brush everybody up on the backstory, we don't need to go into all the specifics and all the details because we already did 2 separate segments on this, one on Crystal Kyle and Friends, and then another one that was like a weekend segment that we posted. If you want to know like everything to this point, go check out those videos. But the gist of what happened is Steven Crowder comes out and he had this melodramatic title on a video like, "It's time to stop this." And then in the video, he describes what he calls the big con. And he says, hey, conservative media is actually conning you. It's a giant scam. They say they want to stand up to big tech, but actually they're in bed with big tech. And his evidence to that effect was, hey, look at this contract that they offered me. And he doesn't say the name of the company. He just shows provisions of the contract. And the provisions are, hey, if you lose 50% of your YouTube revenue, you lose 25% of your fee, which kind of basically means your salary. And then they say if you get a YouTube strike, you lose X percentage. If you get kicked off of Facebook, you lose X percentage. And so Steven Crowder looks at this and says, if you're going to fight big tech, then you can't capitulate to big tech and dock me pay if I get penalized by big tech. So that's his argument. Now, again, he doesn't say the name of the company, and he also, notably, doesn't say how much he was offered. Well, then cut to, a day later, the CEO of the Daily Wire, a guy by the name of Jeremy Boring, hilarious name, by the way, he comes out and he basically lets everybody know it was us that offered Steven Crowder the contract, and now I'm going to be fully transparent with you. I'm going to go through every single line of the contract and tell you what each thing means and why, of course, this isn't exploitative. And we learned in that segment that Steven Crowder was offered $50 million over 4 years with, some extension options as well. I think another $25 million for 2 more years after that. So, their argument is effectively, don't say this is exploitative if we're paying you $50 million over 4 years. And even if you don't like specific provisions in the contract, you could have counteroffered. You could have said, hey, drop this thing and give me that much, and then we're good. So he didn't do that. Steven Crowder instead went on to record a phone call with Jeremy Boring, the CEO of the Daily Wire. The CEO had no idea. And in the phone call, Steven Crowder is basically, he went into it trying to play gotcha, trying to get him to say something damning. And the guy said, like, yeah, people can come work here if they're starting up and they be wage slaves for a little bit, but then they build a name and they can move on and they'll make a lot of money effectively. And so Steven Crowder took that part about them being wage slaves, played that on his show. Again, the thrust of his argument is these people they're just flat out exploitative. And now Steven says, it's not about me, it's about the next guy. I'm looking out for the next guy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so they're sniping back and forth, right wing in disarray. Well, the other day, Candace Owens went on Tim Pool's show, and Candace Owens, of course, was going ham on Steven Crowder. Steven Crowder came on a couple days ago, and Steven Crowder, I'm going to show you some key moments here from the interview with Tim Pool. We'll listen, and then we'll break down who's right, who's wrong, and all that fun stuff.
Before we get to that, before we get to like the finances,
let's go through the time.
Let me ask you this. If someone publicly was going, and by the way, I'm not going to be doing the personal stuff. I'm not going to be coming in here calling anybody a bitch, right? Sending out hatchet people. I understand why Candace was mad. Honestly, I understand why she was. I'd probably be mad too. So I don't think it gives you an excuse to go and talk the way like every girl does who gets their husband into a fight at a bar. But I understand.
All right, look, on that point, Crowder's kind of right. I mean, I get it. Candace Owens is repping the company. The company feels slighted because it was a setup from Steven Crowder, and Candace was going around calling Steven a bitch. She said this was a bitch move, but Candace did go on Tim Pool's show, and she did kind of sound like every girl who gets her man in a bar fight. Anyway,
she was upset. If you had the ability, if someone's going out saying, "Hey, you're a difficult person who only cares about the money," and that you're a bitch, and you had the opportunity to clear your name because it was verifiably untrue, which now no one is arguing, would you do it? How else would people switch from it was about a $50 million salary to recording a phone call? Do we allow it when James O'Keefe does it? Is it only when corruption is on the side of the left? And here's the issue: I'll tell you who this hurts. The dishonesty. I'm not just saying Daily Wire. This is about the entire movement as a whole. There are a lot of practices that go on, and it hurts the sponsors, hurts the creators, hurts the viewers, hurts the investors. And by investors with us, it's entirely Mug Club. It's people who pay to subscribe. We don't make a dime off of YouTube. We haven't for many years. And it hurts if you believe what we say we believe, the movement in the country as a whole. So that right there, right, is fundamentally dishonest. And the gaslighting still keeps taking place. Candace Owens on this show said, hey, we all follow the same guidelines, right? We all follow. Crowder does too. That's verifiably false.
Now, on that last point, he's wrong, because Steven Crowder does do this thing on YouTube where he says, like, I'm saying the things here that I'm allowed to say here, but if you want to hear the real juicy stuff, then, come behind the paywall. This is something that he's done. And so that's a point that the Daily Wire has come back to time and time again, is like, hey, literally all of us are trying to play ball with the YouTube terms of service, and then we tell people, hey, if you want more, if you want the stuff we can't say on YouTube, then, get behind the paywall and pay, whatever the monthly fee is in order to see it. Now, of course, it goes without saying that the stuff that they can't say on YouTube is usually what? It's usually, I don't know, anti-vaccine stuff, stop the steal, election conspiracy stuff, being vicious against trans people, like Matt Walsh, who said even adults shouldn't be allowed to transition. He said that on Twitter, by the way. So, like, the stuff that they put behind the paywall, it may actually get them in some sort of trouble with YouTube, but this is what they all do. They all water it down just a little bit when they're on YouTube, and then they really, let their freak flag fly when they're off of YouTube. So I got some more here for you. Now Steven Crowder is basically going to brag about the number of strikes he's gotten on YouTube.
So that right there, right, is fundamentally dishonest. And the gaslighting still keeps taking place. Candace Owens on this show said, hey, we all follow the same guidelines, right? We all follow. Crowder does too. That's verifiably false. And I say you can publicly audit this. We've had 4 strikes, right, in the last, since May, I think, 2021 to October 2022. One was the Mekhi Bryant. One was a sketch with Alex Jones. That one's guilty. One was as charged. One was him quoting the CDC. And by the way, none of this will get you in trouble because you can say this now. Him quoting the CDC.
I did, yeah.
Bringing up the CDC numbers on flu deaths for children versus COVID. And we were saying this is interesting science, right? That COVID kills more senior citizens, but for some reason it's significantly less lethal to young people, to infants. That science is accepted now, so you won't get a strike. But that was one of the strikes. The other was when we had Carrie Lake on in a gubernatorial election. 4. How many have taken place from Daily Wire? You guys, 0. Now, here's the thing. I'm not saying it's a badge of honor. I'm not saying that it's a badge of honor to be suspended. If they came out and said, look, we demand, as Jeremy said in his 55-minute video, we demand that all of our creators follow these rules that YouTube and Facebook set through punitive practices in mandating of our creators to do so. And Crowder's a little bit more of a rebel. You know what? He's been banned for 4 times. And that's not the same kind of, that's not a problem. The problem is saying that we all follow the same rules, because so that's all publicly verifiable. Now, I could tell you guys that behind the scenes, I've had many conversations with senior YouTube executives who say, we might be able to get you remonetized if you kind of play ball like these got Daily Wire and insert other people here. I could tell you that, but would you believe me? I would have to provide receipts. I could tell you that that takes place. That hurts the creators out there who they end up, hitting a glass ceiling that is set, the sandbox that is mandated to their creators. The same thing happens with sponsors.
So what he's trying to do here, and I think it's pretty obvious to anybody paying attention, is he's trying to set himself up here as like, I'm the paragon of the only pure right-winger. I'm the edgiest one. I'm the one who speaks the most truth. I'm the one you can trust. And my badge of honor on that front is the 4 YouTube strikes I've gotten. And apparently the meetings I've had with people at YouTube where they say, hey, man, we can get you remonetized. You just might have to do a little bit of, fixing the rough edges. And so make no mistake about it, this is like the lane he's trying to carve for himself. And I do think that it's going to be an attempt to launch a competitor to the Daily Wire. And if he can paint the Daily Wire as this is the more establishment wing of the Republican Party and I'm the real outsider heir apparent to the America First throne, well, in terms of the online reaction in that right-wing world, it does look like Steven Crowder is winning the battle at the moment. Tim did a poll of his own audience on this. And remember, he had on Candace Owens before, so he repped the Daily Wire side, and then he had on Steven Crowder, so he's here on Steven Crowder's side. And Tim's audience, I think, was 63% on the side of Steven Crowder. Now, again, I do find it so funny, though, because he's like, he's bragging here, like, hey, we got the YouTube strikes, and he brings up how they had on Carrie Lake, and that's one of the reasons why. And it's like, okay, YouTube cracked down on the election conspiracy stuff, like, saying it's a stolen election when all the evidence is to the contrary. Over 60 court cases, Donald Trump lost every single one. None of the claims that these guys like Mike Lindell make have ever come to fruition. I mean, they've just gotten just verifiably wrong over and over and over. People spread them. And he's bragging like, by me continuing to question the election and having on one of the chief election deniers, Carrie Lake, like, this is what makes me more brave or something. And compare that to lefties and what we get knocked for. Now, the things that, honestly, nowadays, you're more likely to get a demonetization from cursing, which sucks for me right here. But also, usually we get knocked if we're covering Syria, or we're covering Afghanistan, or we're covering Saudi Arabia, or we're covering Israel. So, we cover controversial topics and do topics that actually challenge power, and we get knocked in terms of demonetization or deranked in the algorithm. And his bragging point is like, I was doing election denial stuff. Aren't I so brave? No, you're really stupid, actually. Because I don't know, does Steven Crowder really believe the election was stolen from by Joe Biden, excuse me? Does he really believe that? I find it hard to imagine he believes that. I think almost every Senate Republican does not believe that. They know the election was genuinely won by Joe. I mean, how many votes did he win by? 7 million votes or something like that? 5 million votes? Even Hillary beat Trump by 3 million votes. So, and I know, I get the Electoral College is different, but there's no evidence. Biden had over 300 electoral votes. It's like this wasn't really all that close. And he thinks it makes him brave. No, it really makes you stupid. Now, understand something. I'm not on the side of like, hey, he should get demonetized or he should get, kicked off of YouTube or whatever, get a strike for talking about that. No, I believe in free speech. He has a right to talk about all that stuff. But I just find it funny that he's holding himself up as some sort of like hero for talking about said topics. And even on the issue of COVID, like it is true that every step of the way, the CDC and the health officials said something and then it turned out months later, there's new evidence and it's like that thing we all thought was true. Turns out it's not true. Like that's accurate. But don't also fudge the reality that, these guys do push genuine misinformation. Now, again, I'm not on the side of, hey, ban them for that, because I believe in free speech, but don't pretend like it's just virtuousness or it's just being principled. No, I'm sure I could pick 5, 6, 7 different segments from Crowder's show where he says something that is demonstrably untrue about the vaccine or the pandemic or whatever. So anyway, I still got one more for you here. This is fun. I enjoy this. So Adam Friended says, breaking, Steven Crowder accuses the Daily Wire of faking views so the Daily Wire can lie to advertisers about their audience sizes and deceptively inflate ad rates. All right, so let's see what he says, and then I'll give you my experience from, being on YouTube myself and kind of being in the roughly the same industry. I'll tell you what my experience is. Let's watch. That
hurts creators. And the same thing, by the way, when we're talking about misleading practices with sponsors. There's no problem right? And this is all publicly verifiable. I want you guys to be able to audit this so that there don't have to be as many receipts provided. You market your channel, right? I think we probably have some ads running right now, like Spotify, like, hey, if you like this show, tune in on Spotify. Yeah. But there's a big difference. We know that there's a huge problem in our industry of pay to play. Now, you can do that. That's fine if you want to grow your numbers. But
what is that?
So pay to play means that you can buy views, right? You can pay to play. You can run your video as a pre-roll ad, and people see that number. But really, a lot of them are 14-second views, 8-second views, but it still clicks that counter. The closest apples to apples comparison that you could do right now is you could go out and take, like, let's say, not this controversy because there's cross-pollination, but Ben Shapiro's a huge show. Of course he is. But go take some videos there right now that have 1 million plays. Go month after month. Take a bunch of them. Look at the likes. Look at the comments. Take videos from my channel. It's comparable plays. Take them with 800,000, 600,000 plays because we've converted them a lot to Rumble. Look at the likes. Look at the comments. It's startling because it's a lot easier to buy plays than it is to buy likes and comments. That's not a problem.
Wait, are you saying that the Daily Wire is buying views for their content?
I'm saying that they run the videos. This happens not just Daily Wire, to be clear. Stop Big Con is designed because of this entire industry. And what happens is, yes, these views get inflated. There's nothing wrong with running ads to increase the video count. The problem is this. When that is used to then go out and set sponsorship rates. And then this is what happens with creators. When you sit down with sponsors, and these are hard-earned dollars, right? A lot of them are mid-sized companies. You run them on this show and they say, yeah, but you know what? We didn't get our money's worth, and this person is the #1 show. Because they go out and they say that they have these numbers, and they set what happens? They drop those rates across the board, which hurts everybody, or they pull out altogether. Now, you can publicly verify that information. Now, I could tell you guys that I've had conversations with sponsors that say, we're not going to be running in the conservative space because it's just not as effective as we thought it was, or you know what, we're going to be pulling out. And content creators just say, why am I getting these low advertising?
So when it comes to the Daily Wire, they're a behemoth, #1. #2, they do act more like a traditional corporate media company. And clearly they have big money backing behind them because they're swimming in millions and millions of dollars, and they offered Steven Crowder $50 million. And so I knew that they did a lot of advertising. I knew that whatever, it's on Facebook, Twitter, or not Twitter, excuse me, on Facebook, on YouTube, that they do a lot of advertising. And it's almost like they elbow their way in the room to be taken seriously by big money and to be like promoted and pumped out there as much as possible. I knew that. I did not know the other thing he's alleging here, which is there's some weird scheme where you can like blow up your YouTube video view numbers by running it as an ad, and people watch for 4 seconds or 8 seconds or whatever, and then that counts towards an ad. I've never heard of that before. But granted, like we're honest here, so for me this is all shocking, right? Like every aspect of this is shocking. The idea that, you know, if you look at a Crowder video with 800,000 views and a Ben Shapiro video with 1 million views, that there would be more likes and engagement with the Crowder video, which, by the way, is some indication that maybe there's a little something sketchy going on. I do think there's a range of engagement that's possible. You know, you could have a 1 million view video that has X number of comments and another 1 million view video that has, you know, Y number of comments. So I think there's a range that's reasonable. But if the gap is like tremendous, then maybe Crowder's right about that. And this would be, let me just say this. I wouldn't be surprised if the Daily Wire, given everything else that we know about them, if they are engaged in some stuff like that to effectively hoodwink advertisers to get top dollar from the advertisers. And what Crowder's saying here is like, that's dishonest business. It's, you know, hurting the ad companies. It's hurting the rest of the creators in the space, because when they catch on to it, then they cut the rates for everybody, yada, 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 right? So, I mean, that is kind of a big claim that he's making. But look, I will say, whenever the numbers come out on Facebook, Daily Wire's like #1 or in the top 10 of all, or top 5 of all the like news outlets that get their stuff spread around. And I always looked at that like, that's amazing, because you know, some of it's organic, right? But a lot of it is just they bought their way to that position. You look at the numbers of Ben Shapiro on YouTube, he gets really great numbers. Again, some of it are people who genuinely like him and they actually follow him and they actually want to hear what he has to say. But a lot of it is, if Crowder's telling the truth here, which is questionable because he's said many things that don't exactly line up in this podcast and in this whole fiasco. But like, if this is somewhat true, man, that's kind of damning, right? That's kind of damning of the Daily Wire and the way that they do business. Now, having said all that, there's one more fact here, which I think really hurts Steven Crowder and sort of blows up his case, right? Because he's making it seem like I'm a principled crusader and I'm just looking out for the little guy. I'm looking out for the next guy. I want conservative media to get out of bed with big tech. He keeps coming back to this. This is his main claim. He says it over and over and over. We got to get out of bed with big tech. We got to get out of bed with big tech. Like, stand up and fight big tech if you say you're going to fight big tech. Don't lie about it. Don't lie about it. This is his main line of argument. However, there was another moment in this podcast where Luke Rudkowski, who's Tim Pool's co-host, he asked a couple of actual tough questions of Steven Crowder, because for a lot of it, got to keep it real, a lot of it was a hug box. Tim was kind of using kid gloves on him. But to be fair, he also kind of used kid gloves on Candace Owens, so it might just be his style. But either way, Luke chimes in with is the correct question, which is, hey, the Daily Wire guys claim you actually did counter offer. So when they offered you $50 million with that contract, that you showed some of it, they showed all of it. They did hear back from you, and you hit them with a preposterously high number. The number was either $120 million or $130 million. It was something like that, right? And so if that is true, that, you know, he was offended by a $50 million offer and he counteroffered with 120 or 130 million, let's say theoretically the Daily Wire accepted that, right? And they were like, okay, fine. Let's sign on it. Let's do the deal. Steven Crowder obviously wouldn't be doing any of this. He wouldn't be doing any of this. He wouldn't be, I'm on principled crusade looking out for the next guy. He would have taken the money. So ultimately, it is a dispute over money, even though Steven Crowder keeps saying, like, no, this has nothing to do with money, nothing to do with money, nothing to do with money. That is kind of devastating. Now, Steven dodges that question a few times when Luke asks him. Like, he clearly tap dances around it, and he tries to say, like, to the extent he answers it at all, which, again, he tried not to answer it, eventually he was like, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe my agent kind of maybe counteroffered or something. Okay, but your agent's acting on behalf of who? Acting on behalf of you. So if your agent asked for 120 or $130 million, that means you were asking for 120 or 30, which means you're willing to play ball. So it's not a principled crusade. It's not about those provisions. And by the way, allow me to say this. This is the part that most people seem to be missing. The idea that those provisions mean you're quote unquote in bed with big tech is actually kind of an absurd claim. Why? Because those terms that he's complaining about actually make it so that the risk is spread between Steven Crowder and the Daily Wire. He's making it seem like, well, I bear all the risk. I'm bearing the brunt if big tech cracks down, if YouTube or Facebook or whoever cracks down. No, go look at the numbers. One of the provisions is if you lose 50% of your revenue, 50% of your YouTube ad revenue, then your fee is reduced by 25%. Okay, but you could do the math on that, and it might work out that effectively Steven Crowder is losing the company money and the company is still subsidizing him. So the argument he's making is kind of bogus. It's kind of a bogus argument. Because even with those provisions, which Steven cries about and says these are, you know, super exploitative or whatever, if you actually crunch the numbers and go through them, they're not exploitative. As Ben Shapiro said, and others at the Daily Wire have said, the idea is if your show loses a lot of money, then you're going to lose a lot of money, you and me. Now, I get Steven Crowder trying to mitigate his risk by signing with another company, right? But they are mitigating some of your risk. They're just not mitigating all of your risk, right? And so it's like, the reason why Steven Crowder, one of the reasons why he's as big as he is in the conservative space is a lot because of his YouTube channel. Now, he's tried to change that by going to Rumble, right? And he gets good numbers at Rumble too. But having 6 million YouTube subscribers is part of the reason he's a hot commodity in the commentary market for right-wingers. And so you can't just say, if your YouTube channel goes away completely, I still want the guaranteed $50 million or $130 million or whatever it was over whatever he wanted over 5 years. That would be absurd. That'd be the Daily Wire asking to go bankrupt, even with their sugar daddy billionaire money coming in. So, look, honestly, when it comes down to it, every now and then Steven Crowder makes a point that I think is fair, and I love the fight that's going on with the Daily Wire right now. But ultimately, I think what Steven Crowder is doing here is he's trying to virtue signal as I'm the last one true right-winger. I'm the only uncorrupted right-winger. And all the others are scamming, and they're con men. And look, that just doesn't pass the smell test, dog. It just doesn't. Especially looking at the numbers that these people are doling out to talent. Granted, Steven Crowder's he's an established name, right? So he's going to get a lot, especially compared to somebody who's up and coming. But looking at these sorts of numbers, they don't know how good they have it, right? Like here on the left, there is no big money. I was talking about this with some other left-wing creators. It's like there's no billionaire who is ideologically invested on the left and is going to turn around and say, let me give you $50 million over 5 years, and I want you to go out there and advocate my taxes get raised. They're never going to say that. So there's never going to be a billionaire who's a sugar daddy for us like they have billionaire sugar daddies for them. And so it's just an institutional, structural disadvantage. So the only way we make money is how? The default ads on YouTube or any other platform, right? And the reason why that's ethical is because there's a big buffer between yourself and the advertiser. So there's, Google has their own ad team and they set up everything. You don't have to have any conversation at all with any advertiser, right? So it's ethical in that respect. There's a wall of separation between you and the advertisers. The only way we make money is those sorts of ads, the default ads. We refuse, as a matter of principle, to do ad reads because we think they're gross. And other than that, it's crowdfunding. It's the subscriber model. It's bottom up, right? It's like you guys tipping me $5 a month on Patreon. Or it's Crystal, Kyle, and Friends, where you pay $5 a month and then you get the video of all the shows and you get it a day early. Everybody else can listen for free, the audio version. Like, that's how we do it. And look, that's ethical, and it means I can sleep at night, and I'm very proud of our business model, right? But we got nothing compared to these guys. And he's crying over a $50 million offer because there were some negotiable provisions in the contract which aren't nearly even as exploitative as he acts like they are. And he says some things, by the way, that are flat out untrue. Like he says, under this, they'd own like my image and my likeness and my content in perpetuity. And that's just not true. That's a misstatement of what the contract actually means. And, Jeremy Boring kind of goes through and explains all the stuff if you watch that full 55-minute video. So anyway, let him fight, dog. Let him fight. I kind of enjoy it because usually it's the left at each other's throats, just going ham on each other, being vicious against each other. Usually the right has a default solidarity and they go after who they view as the biggest boogeyman, which is the left. Well, that's not the case anymore. Now they're going directly at each other's throats. And I guarantee you, hear me now, quote me later, this is going to manifest in the DeSantis versus Trump split. There's some ideological differences at the core here, which are going to become more obvious, more apparent. You're going to see Ben Shapiro, who's much less anti-vaccine, much less in favor of the election conspiracies, and, Trump won in 2020, much more pro-DeSantis than Trump. Now that's going to butt right up against Steven Crowder, who's more anti-vax, who's more pro-election conspiracies, who's probably more pro-Trump than DeSantis. He was originally a Ted Cruz guy back in the day. Ugh. By the way, Ted Cruz is worse than Trump. But I think now you're going to see he'll go more pro-Trump. And Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire host will probably lean more DeSantis. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be real interesting. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You want to.